I recently switched from Windows to a MacBook Air M4, and here are some things that surprised me. What immediately caught my attention was the display, particularly the way text looks. I know it sounds like such a small detail, but it is something you notice almost immediately. Everything on the Mac looks incredibly sharp and smooth. Whether I'm browsing the web, reading documents, or simply looking through the settings, the text looks so clean that it is actually pleasant to read. They have this polished appearance that makes the whole interface feel premium. Then I went back to my Windows laptop, and suddenly I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. The text looked rougher and slightly pixelated by comparison. Before switching, I thought Windows looked perfectly fine because that's what I had always been used to. But after using the Mac's Retina display, the difference became impossible for me to ignore. The next thing that really impressed me was the overall user interface. Everything feels clean, organized, and consistent. Every icon, every menu, every animation feels like it belongs together. Nothing feels out of place. It gives you the impression that Apple spent a lot of time thinking about even the smallest details. When I compare that with Windows, I personally feel like the design is less consistent. Some icons are circular, others are inside squares, while others follow completely different styles. It sometimes feels like different design languages are mixed together. Of course, that's just my opinion. But the overall experience on Mac OS feels much more polished. Another thing that surprised me was the right click context menu. I never expected to be talking about context menu, but Apple's quick actions are genuinely useful. For example, if I select several images, I can combine them into a single PDF with just a few clicks. If I have a WebP image that I need as a PNG, I can convert it directly from Finder without installing another application or visiting an online converter. They are simple tools, but they are the kinds of tools that save time. When I compare that to Windows, I feel like the context menu is filled with shortcuts that don't really add much value to my workflow. On the Mac, it feels like Apple focused on giving you tools that help you get things done immediately. And after using them for a while, they have become one of those little conveniences that I didn't know I was missing until I switched. Installing applications also surprised me. The first time I installed a third party application that was not from the App Store, I expected a long installation wizard just like on Windows. Instead, I opened the package, dragged the application into the applications folder, and that was it. I actually stopped for a moment because I thought I had missed something. Removing applications is just as easy. In many cases, I simply move the application to the trash. There's no uninstall wizard asking me to click next several times, agree to terms and conditions, choose installation folders, or go through multiple screens before finally finishing. The whole process feels refreshingly simple. I also discovered that my assumption about Mac applications was completely wrong. I genuinely believe that almost every useful application required a purchase. But after spending some time exploring, I found plenty of excellent free third party applications. Yes, professional software still exists, just like on Windows, but there are also many free alternatives that are more than enough for everyday use. Another misconception I had before switching was that Apple products only work well with other Apple devices. Years ago, I had a classmate who owned an iPhone, and I remember how limited it was when it came to sharing files with non Apple devices. Because of experiences like that, I assumed Apple had built a completely closed ecosystem. But after using the MacBook, I realized how much things have changed. I connected my Sony speaker, my Xiaomi speaker, and my wireless earbuds without any trouble. Most of the time, everything simply worked. I didn't have to search for drivers or troubleshoot compatibility issues. That completely changed my opinion about Apple's ecosystem. One thing I immediately appreciated was how clean macOS feels because there are virtually no ads. On Windows, I often saw recommendations and promotional content appearing in different parts of the operating system, especially in the search menu. Personally, I found those distractions unnecessary. On the Mac, everything feels focused. The operating system simply lets me use my computer without constantly trying to recommend something else. It makes the entire experience feel more premium. I also noticed that software updates feel much less intrusive. Of course, macOS still receives updates, but they don't constantly interrupt what I am doing. On Windows, I often felt like another update or restart notification would appear just when I wanted to continue working. On the Mac, updates seem to stay in the background until I am ready. Another thing that impressed me is how quickly the MacBook starts up. I open the lid, and within seconds, I am already back where I left off. With my Windows laptop, booting often took much longer, and even after reaching the desktop, I still had to wait for startup programs to finish loading. It's a small thing, but over time, it makes a big difference. One final thing I didn't expect was how much more confident I feel when doing online transactions. Whenever I'm logging into my bank account, making payments, or entering sensitive information, I simply feel more at ease. Part of that comes from Apple's reputation for prioritizing security and privacy. I'm not saying Windows is not secure, especially if it is kept updated and used responsibly. This is simply how I feel after using both operating systems. Now, with all of that being said, I don't want this video to sound like I am saying the MacBook is perfect, because it is not. There are still several things that I honestly think Windows does better. The biggest one for me is moving files. On Windows, it's incredibly simple. You select your files, click cut, go to another folder, and then click paste, done. On the Mac, I kept looking for the cut option because that's what my muscle memory expected. Instead, I had to learn a completely different workflow. Once you understand it, it works. But coming from Windows, it definitely felt less intuitive. Another thing I miss is browsing through large collections of images. Since I work with graphics quite often, this matters to me. On Windows, I can open one image and simply press the arrow keys to move the next or previous file in the folder. It feels effortless. On the Mac, I had to learn a different way of doing it by selecting multiple images before opening them. It works, but I still find the Windows approach faster for viewing large image libraries. Keyboard shortcuts were another adjustment. Years of using Control plus C, Control plus V, Control plus X, and Control plus A built up muscle memory that was difficult to change. The command key sits in a different position, and at first it felt awkward. In fact, I ended up remapping my keyboard by swapping the command key with the FN key because it made the shortcuts feel much more familiar. That's how deeply Windows shortcuts were ingrained in me. Finally, I still prefer how Windows handles Maximize applications. On Windows, if I'm using a Maximize app and I open another app like Notepad or Local Send, it simply appears on top of the current one, keeping everything on the same desktop. On the Mac, it works similarly if the current application is not in true full screen mode. However, because the MacBook Air has a smaller display, I usually prefer using apps in full screen to make the most of the available screen space. The problem is that once the current app is in true full screen mode, opening another app doesn't just place it on top of the existing one like Windows does. Instead, macOS switches to a different space. Personally, I still prefer the Windows approach because it feels faster and more convenient. So, after everything I have experienced, do I regret switching? Not at all. Not at all. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
Something fresh and bright. Everything I've learned I'll bring to light. Don't forget to follow and watch me tonight. Hit subscribe right here on Jersh All TV. Jersh All TV. Jersh All TV. Oh, 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 oh. Jersh All TV. Jersh All TV.